I want to talk about making asynchronous web calls, and I'm going to use Flask, the really awesome, web framework written in Python. So get into it. Oh yeah, and I'm going to use D3.js. Okay, so the rationale here, I'm going to keep this really, really simple. I'm not going to go too deep on Flask. I'm actually really glad you linked to that sort of advanced topics, because there's always more to learn. Flask is simple to get started with, but has a lot of cool stuff built in. But I'm going to keep it really simple. I'm using D3 to kind of give us something to look at, give us an example of why we might want to do this. But the real point of this, the crux, is how asynchronous web works, like how AJAX works. When I started learning web development and web apps, not just like web pages, at first it was sort of bewildering because it seemed like magic, right? Like how's, you click like, you click get description or something on a product page and the little window like scales into view. Like anytime the entire page isn't reloading, right, that's asynchronous, which, I mean, these days is like just everywhere, so you almost don't notice it or take it for granted. But how does it actually work? And I wanted an example of this, and I wanted like the simplest distillation that I could come up with for myself for reference later, and that was really the original motivation, but I figured it made a fairly decent little demonstration too. Yeah, because web stacks are deep and complicated. So, what is Flask? Like I said, it's a web framework. It's written in Python. It has a really nice sort of, it has really excellent documentation, which in the Python community is saying a lot, in my opinion. It's written in Python. If you wanted to hack on Flask or develop, you could do so, but you also, build it into your existing Python code base and that sort of thing. Yeah, it's well documented. It's not the web server, so this is like one of the first things that's not obvious when you're starting with the web, at least it wasn't when I was. The web server is the thing that actually like runs your app. Flask is generally referred to as like an application or web framework, but the web server is going to be something like Nginx or Apache, or in this case I'm running it locally on my computer, and it's just Python simple HTTP server is a module. You do Python-m simple HTTP server, and that's it. So it doesn't provide that. That's just the important thing to keep in mind. And then it's not Django, so sorry about that. What is D3.js? D3 is a really incredible tool that Mike Bostock, this guy, it's just some guy he maintains, he's done an incredible job creating it. All of these, by the way, this is its homepage, but all of these little icons that as you mouse over, like those all are links to examples of visualizations, and so that's kind of neat. It's in JavaScript. It's a JavaScript framework, so it runs on the front side, the front end of your app. But it's not really about the data visualization, I would argue. It's not first about that. It's really about how you represent your data, how you store it internally, the data structure, and then re-present it, either visually or not, in some other format, perhaps. And it's correspondingly kind of deep too by itself. It's sort of this entire language to learn. And again, because it's in JavaScript, it helps you know JavaScript. Sorry. All right, so that's sort of the background. Let me get some examples going here. Actually, no, I've got it over here on my first monitor. So, you can you could write to sort of get going. And when I say app, man, that's off the screen. So sorry, but I'm trying to get it where I can see actually whole content. You see down at the bottom it says app.py, so that's the file app.py, and to run it you say Python space app.py, or make it executable. But this is everything you need to get a single page app up and running in Flask. And the last bit, sorry, I should really probably not do a dual monitor setup. So this bit at the bottom is really standard Python. If name equals main, do this thing, and that's how when you call it at the command line, that's the thing that gets done. App.run is opening the Flask app, starting the Flask app. It's the main entry point. And then right above, you have your imports from Flask, import Flask, and a couple of other utilities, and then app is Flask app. You instantiate it. And so that's how, when you do app.run, you've got your app. Now, here's the single method and the single route. And that's where I was trying to get us to. The route is the /, it's the base path, and that route is specified in the decorator to the method, app.route. The @ symbol is the decorator, if that's not familiar to you. And then the method is def_index, named index, and all it does is render a template index.html. Very straightforward. But the point is that if you want to add more paths, you add other routes. And the thing to keep in mind is that routes are identified by the method name, not by that path. So for example, let me bring in URL for redirect, and then let's define a new route. So if we wanted to do, say, app.route hello, define a method for this, def aloha, and, it takes no arguments, it returns, and now we're going to redirect to the URL for the base route, but that route is not /, it's URL for index, it's the name of the method, right? So by doing that, we're saying if someone hits /hello, handle it with the method aloha, serve the URL for the index route, and in this case actually, or URL for is like lookup essentially. So look up that and then redirect. And so if the background task is running correctly, it'll update automatically. And if I do /hello, it just redirects. Now let me actually go one step further, because it's maybe not even obvious what just happened. But so let's say instead of redirecting, let's do hello there, and we'll just print that, I suppose. So it won't redirect. Hello there, that's the text. So now if we add one more route, make it, what's another greetings, I don't know, running out of terms meaning hi, but if we add, yeah, go into other languages. So if we add, say, /greeting, we define a method of guten Tag, which is, good day. And then we return, redirect, URL for what we did before. This time we're going to return the route for /hello, which is the method aloha, right? And so what do we see when we go, which did I call it? Greetings. We get redirected to /hello, and the content is hello there. So you know, if you write web apps for a living, this is probably like chump change, right? But if you've never written a web app and you've never done a web framework like Django or something, this stuff is like, I don't know, for me, when I started learning it, it's like black magic. It's crazy stuff, right? Like, where did I go? How did I get there? And, you know, when it gets, like when your web app gets non-trivial and it gets a little bit more complicated, figuring out how you got to say /hello when you were at, you know, users add to cart or whatever it is can be a little tricky to debug and trace down. So that's what, for me, that sort of mantra there is routes are identified by the method name. So that's Flask routes, and that's like the most simple shoestring introduction of Flask. Any questions so far? All right, so just kind of an aside, Flask uses Jinja for page templating. Django, I believe, also uses Jinja, which I don't know.
Jinja was modeled after Django.
That's what it is. It looks like
yeah,
Jinja,
they look very
they
similar.
Look similar. Yeah, okay.
But yeah, Jinja
and supposedly they are going to have pluggable templating engines in the future, but it's the Django template.
Import one from the other. Yeah. So at any rate, this is really just sort of a digression. But Jinja it means that you're not just writing flat HTML. So backing up a tiny bit here, when we go to the base route, we import index. Let's find that. So that's in templates index, and this is strict HTML. You could serve this file directly. But the point here, and if you've never seen templating before, is that you can have like other content, right? And oops, got rid of that route. To base route. So I added a footer, right? No big deal. So, but now, you want the footer and the header on every single page, and so you use Jinja to include footer. And this is not HTML, right? This is this templating, curly brace, %. The markup is Jinja, and I think I actually already have it here. This is a previous version, but you're including a footer and, oh, nice.
You'd say footer.html.
Yeah, you're right. Thank you. All right, so now you've got PyKC rocks, which is in footer, and it's just included. So at any rate, that's just an aside. When you see this kind of syntax, it's templating, and what that gives you is reusable components of your web page, which is hugely useful when you have anything other than like a static single page and that sort of thing. So anyway, that was an aside. All right, so last piece of the background, the setup here is that D3 is, like I said, a way of representing your data, a way of visualizing data. It uses SVG a lot, so it sort of embeds SVG inside of the JavaScript inside of your web page. And this is kind of where like web apps are complex. You've got SVG, you've got JavaScript, HTML, and then some sort of server-side app like a Python app or something. So it kind of sucks. It kind of gets a little bit complicated. You have to go like 5 different standards and that sort of thing, which is too bad. There's solutions out there like Shiny for R, and there's a framework called, I think, Boca, which is both server-side and client-side Python. So it's sort of, you can write your web app entirely in your native language, and those things are very cool. They're doing some really cool stuff, but it's kind of a specialized use case. At any rate, D3 is not just JavaScript. It's not just SVG or visualizations, and there's good examples of that, like how you might do that, how you might represent data without using the sort of standard thing D3 assumes, but you'll know when you get there, you'll know if you need to. So that's just a brief background. All right, so now let's make this like a little bit interesting, right? Go to step 2. Just blow it all away. And if my background task is working properly, it'll update. All right, so this is something to look at. It's something kind of cool. It's not my idea. This is actually based very closely on one of those examples from the D3 homepage and Mike Bostock's examples. And I just thought it was kind of a neat visualization and neat idea about representing like categorical data or non-numeric float data and that sort of thing. These examples, by the way, Bostock's blocks, he's got a whole bunch of other ones. This is the third in this little series, and then there are these sort of single-page examples where all the code is down here and that sort of thing. It's really quite nice. But I've re-implemented it locally. I'm running it locally, and you'll see it doesn't quite behave the way his does. I tried to write my own implementation. It's a little bit different, but at any rate, point being here is that now we're doing something real time or periodically. It's not just a static page. And so let's dig into this a little bit. So in the app.py, nothing's changed. We render the template index. Template index, nothing's changed. But the piece that I didn't go into before is that we've got in the body of the page, we've got a header, and then we've got a div, and then that text I showed you referencing the source. And the div is sort of where everything's happening. So if you open up the developer console, and you go to inspector, or actually it's actually usually very easy to start. You can right click and say, well, all right, I guess it's updating. You can right click and say inspect element, and you get immediately there. So this is that web page. Or the same content that you saw in index.html. But then inside of the div, there's a whole bunch going on. So this is where, behind the scenes, D3 has added this SVG sub-element. And then inside of that, it adds objects on the page for every element of the set. And it's actually updating. It's kind of crazy. Like it updates the position in the developer console in real time, which is kind of weird, fun to watch. So how's that happening? Well, we're also importing D3.js, and then we're importing our own code, D3-demo.js. And so if we look at that, static demo.js, we define an alphabet. We populate a list data with a random selection from the alphabet. And then down here, I'm going to come back to that code in a second, but down here, we define a function update, and on the update, a whole bunch of stuff goes on. I'll get back to that real quickly. I just want to cover the broad strokes first. So the main thing here is that we have a set interval function. That's a very standard JavaScript. And in there, we're calling add data and calling update, and we're passing in our data, our list. And add data is a thing to cycle out the letters. We shuffle some of the letters. Please ignore this because I realize later it's really not. It's not truly correct. It does it sort of in place. But it's doing something, right? It's cycling the letters a little bit and then updating. And the update is kind of where all the interesting stuff happens. This is all kind your D3 action. So going back up to the top, first define sort of the boundaries of our page, and then we call D3.scale, and we take the domain as our data, and the range is the width, and we do it again for the height. Domain is the data, range is height. So when I say height, var y is like the y offset for these letters, we're actually the boundaries of our box, and we're using these utilities, D3.scale. So this is the kind of thing that D3 is really awesome for, and also why it's like a language unto itself. All you're doing is the very, the high level. You're saying map my data set to this output range, right? You don't have to worry about any of that. It figures it out for you. And this is the power of D3. Like, if this is exceedingly concise and does a lot of work for you. Like, if you don't believe me, try writing it up yourself in JavaScript, and you'll come out with pages of JavaScript where you're calculating like offsets and the width of the letters, and do you want to like position on the center of the letter and that sort of thing. So this is the power of D3. It gives you a ton of built-in capabilities and really simplifies a lot of pretty complicated stuff. Some of the examples on the D3 homepage deal with topological mappings and like mapping data on a sphere, the globe, and that sort of thing. And I mean, it's really pretty incredible, the stuff that they've written up just as examples on that site. And then, so at any rate, enough about how cool it is, but that's a lot of work in a short line of code. And then here's where we actually find the element of the page and populate it with our data. So we select the ID D3, which in the index page we just defined a div. That's all we've done in HTML or in index. Define a div, and then append SVG, give it the width and the height, and then we append our data. And I'm not going to go too much into this, but this bit here where we're doing SVG select all text, which doesn't exist yet, right? This hasn't been, we're sort of making this up on the fly. We're handing in our data, and then we define an update and enter and exit transitions. And this is like the core of D3's model for editing and working with data. You have enter, update, and exit. And so when we add letters to the list on each cycle, set interval, we're entering the list. And anything that's already there will get updated. That's enter, update, and then exit. If we remove letters, they're exiting. And for each of those states, each of those transitions into and out of our data set, we apply different transformations. And what we're doing specifically is moving the letters around, top to bottom and left to right. And we're also giving them classes. So the coloring actually comes from CSS classes, but those are assigned by this JavaScript code. And so that's where, like when you watch this happening, if you see each letter has a class and it's changing from exit, update, enter, and then the position's changing, and all that's sort of being managed with these JavaScript transitions and by the D3 library. And so it takes some getting used to. It's not at all obvious at first, but once you get that core metaphor, enter, update, exit, that's sort of the crux of D3, and that's a lot of where you manipulate and attach representations to your data. And then and then there's a lot of different representations that D3 provides. The scale ordinal that I showed was like just one, but there's polar coordinates and all sorts of other representations. So that's JavaScript timing. I've kind of gone through. Yeah, I really just went through this. So everything that we've done so far, it's pretty. It looks nice. But it's all front end, it's all client side, and it's just, we're scrambling those letters in JavaScript and doing that like every, I think it was 2 seconds, 2,000 milliseconds. But in all likelihood, you want to provide the data from your backend, from your database, or from your Python side because you just like writing Python more than you like writing JavaScript or something of the sort. So let's look at server-side data. Let's look at how we break this apart and then serve that data from the server. Yeah. So the way we're going to do this, we're going to use a different route. This is that /path that I went into at first, and the route will be providing the data updates unstyled, actually just in a JSON object. And then every time we do the JavaScript update, rather than generate scrambled data on the client side with the JavaScript, we're just going to call the route. We're going to get that data and then represent it. So let's do that. So let's look at app. Now app's changed. We're adding a route, get letters underscore. Get letters, nice tie-in to Unitchip's article about underscores in Python. And the choice here is that get letters is not necessarily like meant for client user consumption. So we're taking that Python approach of hiding it behind like a underscore, although it's not actually. So if we go to get letters, we just get this JSON blob, and it returns the alphabet as a result. The key is result, it's the alphabet. And how are we doing that? Well, we take string.ascii lowercase, that's our alphabet, literally, and then we replace data and then return the result as a JSON object. Now, we only replace if we specify an argument to say, do the replace. So in Flask, you have a request object, which is your web request, and it's got args. And it's very easy to access those args in Python, a very standard way of like a dictionary of args. You say get dataset and get replace, and replace here, I need a doc string, I apologize, but replace here is how many letters to replace. And so if I didn't specify anything, nothing does get replaced. But if you were to supply a specific data set and say replace 3 or something of the sort, it will take that and replace. And this is actually where my shuffling code is not very good right now. I updated it later and then never added it back. So it replaced 2 letters even though I said 3. I apologize for that. But the basic idea here, if you'll humor me, is that when we supply arguments in the URL string, we're not having to like unpack. We don't do like split on ampersand and parse the string and that sort of thing. We refer to it in this very normal like dictionary syntax that Python has, and get everything back in a consistent fashion. Oh yeah, well, I guess I need a couple more slides there, but so now I want to show like how we get from / replace and you get just a list, how you get to the example we had before, more or less. It should look essentially the same, but now if you look at the web console, I guess I didn't show you Yeah, so it's logging what it gets on every statement, but it's also oh, that's weird. Oh, yeah, that's why my web server is running in that hidden session. So it's every time it's making a call the server side. Call me a liar. Oh, I hadn't refreshed. It was actually running step 2 still, just locally. Now, on every update, it's calling the server, and it's calling that path, get letters, with an argument and a replace argument, or a data set and a replace list. And so this is happening locally, server side, and then client side, it's displaying the updates. So let me just run through how that's happening. This is the server side. We say we have a route, we pass in the args, unpack it, and send it back. And then on the client side, on the JavaScript, most of this bit up at the top hasn't changed, but in the interval, in the periodic update, we call get JSON, get letters. And here too, we're not like parsing the path as a string and like adding ampersand and stuff. We're again in JavaScript this time handling a very like nice consistent dictionary syntax, data set and replace. And then when we get it back, these are anonymous functions, but when we get the data set back, we say update, or we're overwriting the existing data and we're calling update. And so in some sense, like our JavaScript code has gotten shorter and simplified because the logic's going on the server side. And then more to the point, we're passing data back and forth, and we're actually passing it forward or from the client to the server and back from the server to the client in each case. So that's how you can exchange your data back and forth, and kind of breeze through it. But to find a route, a different path on the app that serves like the flat raw data, the JavaScript object. But there's really nothing to say that you couldn't serve that from like a different port or a different server entirely, and then your user would truly not have access to that route or that data. So this was very simple to just show you like in that single page app.py, but the same approach would work if you're calling sort of your back-end systems for your data pooling. At any rate, that is, I gave away really the end of it. That's how you take, so what we did, we took just a static web page, like a hello.world sort of HTML page, and then we added D3 and we added like some JavaScript to update periodically and change that data. But then we split it apart, right? And we replaced some of the front end stuff, the scrambling of letters, and even the maintaining of the data set dictionary, or the list of letters. We got rid of that from the front end. We serve it from the Python server side, and it's split apart, and they're talking back and forth, they're passing data back and forth. And that's it. Like, that's very small. There's, like, I think maybe 100 lines of code or something total here. But it, it gives you an example which you can trace. And like, I've already showed this, but by the way, like your web console, your developer tools in Chrome or Firefox, and then your like server output at the command line if you're running it, those sorts of things are indispensable to like figure out, did it go to the route I thought? Did it supply the arguments I thought? And is it showing me, like, is it, like when your SVG object doesn't show up at all, like, does it have a width and a height, and how do you inspect it and that sort of thing? So that stuff's really indispensable. Figuring out how a pretty thing like this, like, how it's actually built behind the scenes. that's all it was, Flask, D3. These slides, this presentation, are using the reveal.js template. Really cool little tool. Also has like nice print style sheets, so if you need to print this out, it should at least be sane in some sense. And that's it. By all means, if you have something to speak about. Yes, Frank.
Sorry, there's which block is your, you said this is based on one of Vostok's blocks? Which
Oh,
is it?
yeah. Yeah, and I actually, it's still there. It's actually the bottom of this page, general update pattern. And it's actually his is the third. He's got he does a sort of similar thing to what I did where he has a simpler one. Yeah, they're just URLs. But if you get to D3.js or you get to his page, block, blox.org, they're all there. And he's got like 3 in that particular series. And then, I mean, this guy, I don't know what, if he ever sleeps or what, because there's an incredible amount of stuff that he's done as just like throwaway examples. So yeah, anyway.
And if you haven't done,
Yeah.
Caleb keeps trying to play down, oh, this is just so simple and this is just so easy. This is a hugely important, I mean, if you've never done web development of any sort before, I mean, the ability to basically have the client solely responsible for how you're seeing it, but you have some sort of huge data set somewhere else that you have some sort of, you're not relying on something running in the browser to give you the data, you're actually getting it from a server or a service that's providing that data and calling it back. I mean, that's, there's so much that, is using this kind of pattern every day that, we don't think of it that way. This is exactly, what big websites that you go to all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like you see, it's not like refreshing the page. Like it's the only thing changing here. This text never changes. It doesn't even get edited by the browser. The only thing is, the pieces that are updated. And that, when you see like responsive web apps, that's what that is. And like I said, I mean, to me at least, it's like magic at first when you first see it. Even when you know how it's done theoretically, like the good ones are still amazing. But yeah, this is also like dead simple. I mean, again, if you write web apps for a living, I've probably put you to sleep. And if you feel like you could have given this talk, I would encourage you to get up here and do so, because like Chip Sass, we need presenters, and there's a lot of stuff I personally love spouting off and all, but there's a lot of stuff I'd like to hear about and I don't know about. So like generator testing, not unit testing, right? There's all sorts of stuff, and like it's really easy to fill up time. If you write out a talk like I did the first time, and you go to give it, and it turns out it's like 2 hours of material. It's a skill that little. Anyway, that's all I got.